Up next, we would like to invite Mr. Subir Chakraborty, Managing Director and CEO, Exide Industries Limited, a mechanical engineer from IIT Madras and an alumnus of IIM Calcutta, 1984. Mr. Chakraborty has spent nearly 4 decades in working in various capacities across several organizations, out of which he spent more than 25 years at Exide Industries Limited, rising from the level of General Manager to the position of Managing Director and CEO. Additionally, he chairs the board of several companies such as Chloride Batteries Southeast Asia, Spex Batteries Limited, Chloride Metals Limited, to name a few. He's been deeply involved in business bodies and associations and is the President Designate of Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's also a National Council member of Confederation of Indian Industry. We welcome you, sir.
Good morning, Director, IIM Calcutta, Dean, IIM Calcutta, other dignitaries, guests, and students. It's nice to be back, although after many years. IIM Calcutta has changed a lot, and I must admit, has changed for the better. So, today's topic is India at 75, navigating global uncertainty and embracing disruption. I am not an economist by any stretch of imagination, and neither will I attempt to give you a prescriptive diagnosis of what needs to be done with the Indian economy. I am a manager by profession, so I try to share with you a practitioner's view. So, you may have heard of this term called VUCA. It's talked about very commonly these days. This term actually emanated out of the US military. So, as all of you may be knowing, VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But essentially, what it stands for is, we do not know what we do not know. If you know what you do not know, it's an easier problem. But if you do not know what you do not know, it's a far tougher problem. Now, this kind of environment is giving rise to various kinds of strains and stresses within the human mind. To start with, there is a lot of brittleness in our thinking, a lot of anxiety, a lot of non-linear processes which are taking place, and above all, the environment is becoming incomprehensible to many of us. We do not know what to do because there are no textbooks which can teach us as to how to deal with this present environment. So before I come to disruption per se, I'd like to put disruption in a historical context. Is disruption really new? Let me take you back to a few cataclysmic events of the past. Indus Valley Civilization. You may have heard of this. A very well developed and mature civilization overnight disappeared. We really do not know the reasons. Could have been floods, could have been change of weather. But those people had to leave that kind of comfort which they used to enjoy, and overnight perhaps live in groups for an uncertain world. Coming closer to our times, the 2 world wars. Estimated 16 million died in World War I and 60 million in World War II. I'm just trying to put our disruption in some kind of context, because we are always lamenting, why has it happened to us, what is the disruption, why are we so unfortunate? So I'm trying to put it into some kind of historical context. Spanish flu 1918, very similar to the COVID. 500 million people are affected and 50 million deaths were there. Please remember, Spanish flu did not strike globally. It was mostly an European pandemic. 1942-43, man-made famine of Bengal. 3 million people died. 3 million may seem small, but please understand that 3 million in a very small geographical area like West Bengal, maybe parts of Bihar and Orissa, is not small at all. If you consider the geographical territory of West Bengal as a percentage of the global territory. Economic crisis 1991, country led by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh, India had to pledge its gold assets to the Bank of England. We didn't have enough foreign exchange, and that was a real crisis, economic crisis, out of which we came through with a lot of honor. Now, if I look at the present, few such events, pandemic 2019, which we have just gone through, 6.4 million people have died so far, compared to the 50 million which died during the Spanish flu. So it's not something extraordinary, not something out of the blue. Perhaps as human beings we have become too soft. I'll give you an example. Just outside Exide house, which you may have seen at the crossing of AJC Bose Road and Chaurangi Road, there are a group of beggars who stay on the pavement, and I've been seeing them for the past 25 years. I saw them during the pandemic, without any clothes, lying on the pavement, and I'm not surprised that none of them have perished, without any masks as well. So obviously, as human beings, we have to question ourselves, are we becoming too soft for the challenges of the future? Have we grown too accustomed to the comforts of life? Obviously, in a crisis situation, the DNA of the beggars are far more resilient than my DNA. I wouldn't be able to last it out in those situations. Going further, Russia-Ukraine war, which is presently going on now, the digital revolution, IoT, artificial intelligence, this is a major disruption which is going through right across the industry. And those industries which are not prepared for it will be in for a surprise. Inflation, commodity pricing, these have become very, very uncertain. Currency devaluation, logistical bottlenecks, and to top all this, I think Mr. Sen talked about huge manpower churn. Right after the pandemic, all companies in India and perhaps globally are facing serious shortage of skilled manpower, good quality manpower, both at the worker level as well as at the managerial level. So, what does it look like? To summarize whatever I have just stated, it looks like we have been in the midst of constant disruption and crisis. So this disruption is nothing new. And yet we collectively feel that we are in the middle of a series of serious crises through which we must learn how to navigate. To navigate, let us look at the past, because disruption is not a new phenomenon. Let me take you back many, many years ago. In fact, 70 to 80,000 years ago. I am taking you back to the Rift Valley of Africa. The Homo sapiens started to migrate out of Rift Valley 80,000 years ago. But we have to understand what gave the Homo sapiens the edge. How did they survive? Because those lessons are even valid today. As they migrated out of Rift Valley, the group which went north met with Neanderthals, which were far stronger than the Homo sapiens. And remember, this was not a friendly drawing room chat. There's a group of people, hunter-gatherers, which are moving on to some other territory, trying to take over that territory. So these meetings usually used to be hostile. And the Neanderthals were far stronger, as we know from their bone structure. And on the eastern side, you had the Denisovans, who were well entrenched. And yet we have these groups of hunter-gatherers who are going through with this migration for whatever reason. Now, some of the things which gave Homo sapiens the edge. Number one, ability to adjust to new surroundings, adaptability. Survival is not for the strongest of the species. Survival is always favors the species which are more adaptable, which can adapt to new surroundings. Ability to communicate. You see, I am talking about a time when communication was not there. Homo sapiens somehow developed group cognition and the ability to communicate with each other. Neanderthals could not. So, even today some tribes communicate through guttural sounds. Those are very primitive sounds through which Homo sapiens began to communicate. And once you communicate, you come into the arena of group cognition and group behavior. And then when you have a group, you have emergence of leaders. So, what really gave the Homo sapiens the edge is to be able to work in a group, to be able to work under one leadership, and to be able to target a clear objective. So what lessons do we learn from history? Number one, adaptability. We have to be adaptable. The word doing the rounds is stagility. You have to be stable and you have to be agile. Second is communication. In times of crisis, you have to learn how to communicate. A leader has to communicate. If a leader shuts himself in his room and does not communicate, it can only spell danger for the rest of the team. Team formation. Michael Jordan, who was an ace basketball player, he won, I think, eight times for Chicago Bulls. He said, talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence win championships. Make the team the star. Team building, team dialogue, team performance. In the army, we always think that, we are fighting for our country. And that is the popular image. Actually, if you talk to an army man, he will tell you that when you are staring at a bullet, you are not fighting for anyone. You are fighting for your friend who is next to you. That is why when the British set up the army units, they set them along provincial lines, Maratha regiment, Punjab regiment, because then you would have close bonding between the people, and when the push comes to shove, it is that bonding which really gives you the strength. Learn to lead. So leadership is an important aspect in any kind of disruption. Managers, there is a difference between managers and leaders. Managers are like thermometers and leaders are like thermostats. So managers react to their environment, they deal with the here and now and measure and report results. Whereas leaders, they influence their environment, alter people's beliefs and expectations, cause action, they just don't measure it, and continually work towards a goal. And last, mindset change. Embrace the comfort of not knowing. If you are always uncomfortable because you don't know something, you will not be able to work in a disruptive environment. Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft, he once said, move from a know-it-all approach to learn-it-all. In India, for example, in Indian classrooms, I don't know what it is like now, but when I was a student, we always expected our teachers to know everything. That is the expectation of a student. If you ask a question, teacher should be able to answer. If he doesn't know, then he is useless. One of the first things that stare at you when you go abroad to a US university or to a foreign university is that the teachers are not ashamed of telling you that I really don't know the answer, let's work on it together. Be willing to muddle through the landscape along with other colleagues. So sometimes you really don't know the end point or the answer, but you must be willing to muddle through the landscape and let the answer evolve. Let go of perfectionism. Resist oversimplification and quick solutions. This is particularly relevant for MBA students because throughout the 2 years or 1 year, you do case studies, you do various kinds of situations, and you then arrive at an answer or possible scenarios. In real life, you may not be able to do that. Sometimes you need to give time and space for the answer to evolve. Don't go it alone, teamwork again, and zoom out for a broader perspective. So, besides the historical perspective, or what lessons we have learned from history, what are the nuances in the modern context that we live in today? Number one, I think it is important that when we strategize, particularly relevant during disruptive times, is to inject courage into strategy. Why courage? Because sometimes you do not know what the future will reveal, and yet you need to take that call, you need to place that bet on behalf of your company. Dhirubhai Ambani, the legendary, iconic businessman, he said, true entrepreneurship comes only from risk-taking. I do not know whether Mihir still is alive. I am told that he is no more. But Mihir's dhaba used to be the dhaba which is just across the road. And I always think, even today, that he is a far greater businessman or far astute businessman than many students who have passed out through this institute. Because he started with this dhaba across the road. He knew what the students wanted, and from there he gradually expanded into some kind of a catering business. And when I met him many years later, he was telling me how he had expanded. So he obviously took risks with his own money. It is one thing to play around with the company's money, which is funded, by your equity shareholders. You can deal with thousands of crores. But when you have to put your provident fund at stake, when you have to put your insurance policies at stake, that is real risk taking, and not everyone has got it. And that is what differentiates the real businessman from the boys. He also said, our dreams have to be bigger, and our ambitions higher, our commitment deeper, and our efforts greater. Secondly, one must encourage courageous conversations. You must not only ask questions, but question all known answers. And as a CEO, you must allow that within your company. So the CEO is talking crap, somebody must be willing to raise his hand and say, look, what you are saying does not make sense. If you don't have that environment, you will never be able to come to the right answers. Combine dialogue, data, and speed in decision making. Think big, think fast, think ahead. Ideas are no one's monopoly. So, in a disruptive environment, you need to think quick, be on your feet. Thirdly, stress test your ideas in team meetings. DBS Bank, which had an astounding turnaround story based out of Singapore, it has a process called the raccoon. It actually builds up a scenario and then it invites employees to actually blow holes into it, to actually find out the faults. Idea may come from anyone, but they have these sessions, they call it the raccoon sessions. And remember one thing, the past is never a good predictor of the future. most of management studies actually analyze the past and try to come up with possible scenarios for the future. There was a point of time when C.K. Prahlad coined this term core competence. It took the whole management fraternity by storm. Everybody was talking core competence. Till some articles started appearing which said that core competence was not relevant because it cited so many other examples of very, very diversified industries which were doing very well. So, analysis of the past does not always lead you to the correct solution. What you need to do is to come up with probabilistic scenarios of the future and then place your bet on the one which you feel is the correct one. Take bold people decisions. Choose a square peg for a square hole. Albert Einstein once said, judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree and it will spend its whole life behaving that it is stupid. So, you have to put the right people in the right place. And Dale Carnegie once said, when dealing with people, remember you are not dealing with creatures of logic, but creatures of emotion. So the whole job of handling people, especially during disruption, is something that needs to be handled with a lot of care. Encourage diversity. These days we have a lot of talk about having diversity in boardrooms and in the workplace. I strongly believe that diversity actually helps in generating more ideas, better scenarios. Next, embrace digitalization. When you buy a flat or a house, you think you have bought that space, those walls, and you feel happy about it. Once a lawyer told me that you may feel about buying that property or that house, but actually what you have bought is a piece of paper which is the conveyance deed. That is what you have actually bought. The house has no significance without that paper. Similarly, in today's context, organizations, when you are taking over an organization, you are not taking over that office or the branch offices or the people. What you are actually taking over is the underlying digital layer. If that digital layer is robust, then your decision is sound. So, where does where does it really impact a company? It impacts in every department. Customer connect, service delivery, product delivery, supply chain management, integrated business planning, manufacturing, HR, shared services, data acquisition, data analytics in real time. So it embraces the whole company, and ultimately the company is actually not a company without that digital layer. That's what you are actually dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Next, rebalance supply chains amidst global uncertainty. I think this has taught us, we have all learned the hard way that you cannot depend on one single source from China or from wherever. You need to have multiple sources. You need to develop alternate arrangements. Align with disruption and try to find competitive advantage. When you are getting swept away in the floods, there is no point trying to resist the water. At that point of time, it is much better if you can hold on to a tree trunk floating something which is there, which will take you to safety. Organic and inorganic expansion. During the pandemic, I think ITC did a series of inorganic expansion projects. That was a good time because people had a lot of time. They were in their houses and they were working from their houses, so they had some time to think over many things. And there were many companies which were ripe for picking at that point in time. And some of the better managed companies which are cash rich, they took advantage of this situation. And instead of underplaying or kind of slowing down their activities, they went on an expansion spree. So disruption is a good time to look for such opportunities in the inorganic space. And finally, I like to come back to Einstein. He said, if you always do what you always did, if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. So, tried and tested methods are not always the best. So, do not be scared to try new things and tread the untrodden path. Because the world will evolve at its own pace as per its own rules. You have no control over that. There is a saying which says, life is what happens to you when you are busy making other plans. You have no control of the environment. You have to decide for yourself whether you want to be part of that evolution by playing an active role or bite the dust by the wayside. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful thoughts and words.